if if it was the philosophy of the government to not help anybody, and they didn't help anybody, um, then that would be that there would be nothing hypocritical about that. But the uh, the People's Party, they distinctly call out the hypocrisy of the government. Um, they point out that the government provided enormous amounts of land to encourage railroads to build railroads. Um, and they say those railroads don't need all that land, and they're not using that land. So the government gave railroads all of this free land, but they can't give us a little bit of money to help us through a drought. Um, also, the government is like keeping tariffs, tax on imported goods high to help wealthy people and corporations, but they can't use that money to help us in a draft. That seems problematic to the People's Party, and they say this to them. This is a representation of the inequality within the system. That the system is built to help wealthy people, to help corporations, but not to help regular people. And that's what they're saying is hypocritical in the system. That's what they're calling out. They're calling out this blatant use of the government to help rich people, to help the wealthy, and and on the other side to actually hurt regular working people. They they don't make any laws that help regular people like have a living wage or safe workplaces. And so by the end of the Gilded Age, many people within the country are calling for reform. Um, the spearhead of this is the end of the patronage or spoil system within the government, in which new administrations essentially fill uh, appointed positions with all of their acolytes, with all of the people in their party. And it becomes like a feeding at a trough where political parties just put their people in, those people get paid, and they get rich by simply being elected. And 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 people begin to say this is not making the government efficient. We have a professional government now. Now we have a government that requires professionalism because the system is now industrial, and industry requires this kind of precision of work. And so they say now we need people who are professionals. So we need to figure out how to hire those people. Uh, and then under Arthur, uh, after Gerard Guiteau uh, assa- assassinates uh, assassinates Garfield, and Arthur becomes the president, they begin to quickly move to create a civil service reform movement, especially under the Pendleton Act. And the Pendleton Act is still in effect even today. If you want to get a job at the post office, at the police, at the fire department, public jobs require you to take exams. And these exams place you within a hiring order. So the higher you score on these exams, the more likely it is you're going to get the job. The great thing about the civil service reform is that it also helped minorities because the Pendleton Act and the Civil Service Reform Acts that followed it required people who passed those tests to be put to the top of the line, and this made them colorblind. This became one of the first sort of colorblind pieces of legislation, and this allowed African Americans to get jobs in the government where they couldn't get jobs other places. And so civil service reform becomes fundamentally important to people um, within this system, but it also sets off a series of political movements that begin to look at the way the government is operating. Um, and as people move away from farms and move into factory work, they recognize something that they didn't recognize before, and that was that that the government really is helping a particular group of people, it's helping wealthy business people, it's helping corporations. Um, but when you leave the farm and you no longer like are reliant solely on your own ability to produce the food that you eat, and then a little bit of money to set aside for purchases that you need to make, and you are now trying to find a home to live in, or to rent or to buy, you're trying to find work that you can earn a living wage at and support a family. um, People begin to recognize that the government is skewed away from them, and that these transitions, the transition from rural to urban living, because by the time you reach the 1890s, 50% of the population of America is now urban. And and from that point, it's only going to get more and more urban, more and more people living in cities. And so this creates a system, a divide between working class, middle class people, and the way the government is working. And so, first, we see the populist movement, and we see populists attempting to get the government to create policies that help regular people. And this is going to encourage people to change the way they think about government, the way they think about voting. Um, and so by the time you reach 1896 and the election of 1896, you have a very large plurality of Americans, workers largely, urban dwellers, who really want a government that is honest, that is working for working people, that is working to help improve cities, and that is working to create efficient systems of government that don't overtax people, but actually use tax money to help people. So one of the biggest shifts that's going to happen in this time period is that people begin to argue that the government should tax them. That taxation becomes a sort of hallmark of this period. And the reason for this is that if you were a populist and you want something, say like the sub-treasury system, which asks the government to build storage facilities for grain and crops, and then to give low-interest loans to farmers so that they can wait to sell their crop until it reaches a profitable price for them, that's going to require the government to spend money. And so populists and now progressives for the next module are going to recognize that the only way you can have a government that is activist and helpful of people is if the government taxes people. That taxation is how the government gets money, and then that money gets used by the government to help the lives of regular people rather than helping the lives of the wealthy. So one of the complaints about tariffs and the mongrel tariff of 1883 was that the government wasn't doing anything. It was collecting all of this money, but it was hoarding it. It was hoarding all of the money. And people began to argue, especially like in Coxley's army, that the government, and so Coxley's army marks a sort of move away from the old sense of the government shouldn't do anything to a very new idea that the government should use its power, its money, to help people, spend money to help people do better. This is only going to be accelerated by progressives who will continue to do this and begin to create a government that becomes more responsive to the individual. All right. So I'll talk to you again after the next module. If you need anything from me, email me or come to office hours.